David had always lived a simple life. He wasn't rich, nor did he come from a family of high status. He was just an ordinary man who worked at a small office in the city, doing what he could to make ends meet. Yet, despite the simplicity of his life, there were moments when he longed for something more. Something exciting, something that would take him far beyond the dull routine he had built for himself. He wasn't always like this, of course. Growing up, he had been adventurous, curious about the world and beyond, but all of that changed after high school. After his childhood friend Saria left. She had been his closest companion since the age of 6. They'd met when she had come to Earth, an alien girl from a faraway world, who had crash-landed on Earth one fateful day. No one knew where she had come from, and neither of them ever asked. She had no memories of her life before the crash. For years they had shared everything: stories, secrets, and dreams. Saria had always been different. Her skin had a soft golden hue, unlike anyone David had ever seen, and her eyes, though human-like, held a certain gleam, a knowingness that didn't seem to match her age. She had never fully belonged to Earth, but to David, she was simply Saria, his best friend. But then, as quickly as she had arrived, she disappeared. One day, she was just gone. No goodbye, no explanation. David had never known why, and it hurt him deeply. He tried to forget her, but there was always that empty space in his heart, the part of him that would always wonder where she had gone and why she left. Years passed. David grew up, graduated from college, and got a steady job. He met new people, made new friends, and life went on. But the memories of Saria never faded. She was always there, lingering in his thoughts like a soft whisper in the back of his mind. He had accepted that he might never see her again. That was until one evening. When everything changed, it was an ordinary Tuesday. David had just finished dinner and was settling down for a quiet night of reading. He had just opened a new book when there was a knock on his door. At first, he didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a neighbor asking for help or a delivery. But when he opened the door, his heart stopped. There, standing on his doorstep, was a woman. She was tall, graceful, and radiated an aura of confidence that David immediately recognized. Her skin was still the same soft golden hue he remembered, and her long hair shimmered like strands of light. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard, the same eyes he had seen countless times as a child, yet now they were filled with a depth of knowledge and power that he had never seen before. "Saria?" he whispered, unsure if his voice could carry the weight of the question. The woman smiled. It was the same smile that had comforted him in his childhood, but now it seemed different, more mature, more knowing. She nodded, and David felt the world shift beneath his feet. "It's me, David," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle but authoritative tone. "I've come home." David could hardly believe it. He blinked, unsure if he was imagining things. The girl he had once known, the one he had thought he'd lost forever, was standing in front of him. And yet, this was no longer the child he had grown up with. The person before him was a queen. There was no mistaking it. She carried herself with the grace of royalty, her every movement exuding an elegance that left David speechless. "Home?" David repeated, still struggling to process everything. "But how? Where have you been? I thought—" "I know you must have questions," she interrupted gently, stepping into his home without waiting for an invitation. "But there is much to explain, and not enough time to do it all at once." David closed the door behind her, still in shock. He led her to the living room where they sat across from each other. There was an awkward silence between them, as if both of them were unsure how to begin. After a long pause, Saria spoke again, her tone more serious now. "I am not the same person you once knew, David. I have changed. I am not just your childhood friend anymore. I've become the queen of my people." David stared at her, his mind racing. "Queen? Of who?" Saria's eyes darkened for a moment, as if the weight of her words was too heavy to bear. "Of the people I left behind. My people, David. My planet. My kingdom. I was never truly from here. I came to Earth to escape, to hide from my enemies. But now I must return and face my past. David felt his heart sink. He hadn't expected this. The girl he had known, the girl he had thought was just like him, was actually royalty from another world. It was almost too much to comprehend. "But why are you here, Saria?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with confusion and concern. "Why now, after all these years?" She sighed, looking away for a moment as if she was gathering the strength to continue. "I came back because I need your help, David. My kingdom is on the brink of collapse. There are factions within my people that wish to overthrow me, and I cannot do this alone. I need someone who understands me, someone who can help me navigate this war that's coming. And I thought, after all these years, you would be the one person I could turn to." David's mind swirled with questions. He had always wondered about Saria's past, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. A queen, a ruler, the girl who had once played games with him in his backyard, the one who had cried with him when they both faced loss, was now at the center of a galactic conflict. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice filled with doubt and hesitation. "I'm just a regular guy. I'm not some royal advisor. I don't even know where to start." Saria reached out, her hand resting gently on his. "I know you are not a royal advisor, David, but I need you because you understand me. You were the one person who never saw me as anything other than Saria, the girl from Earth. You knew me before all of this, and that is something no one else can give me." David looked at her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. The girl he had once known was still there, but she was also someone entirely new. The weight of her situation was clear, and as much as he wanted to say no, to walk away from this strange reality, he knew that he couldn't. Not when it was Saria, not when she needed him. "All right," he said, finally making up his mind. "I'll help you, but I don't know what I can do. I'm just one person." Saria smiled, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "That's all I need, David. One person who believes in me." As she sat back in her chair, David couldn't help but wonder what he had just agreed to. This wasn't just about helping an old friend. This was about stepping into a world he could never have imagined, a world that was light years away from everything he had known. And yet somehow he felt a deep sense of purpose rising within him. He was about to become a part of something far bigger than himself, something that would change not only his life, but the fate of an entire kingdom. The reunion had only just begun, and David knew that everything was about to change. David sat across from Saria, still trying to digest everything she had said. She wasn't the same person he had known. He remembered the curious, wide-eyed child who had landed on Earth, in a small, broken spacecraft. She had been so innocent then, so unaware of the world she had come from. Now she was a queen, powerful and poised. The change was almost impossible to believe. It wasn't just the clothes, the regal robes she wore, or the subtle but commanding way she held herself. It was the way she looked at him now, the weight of the experiences she had been through. The girl who once shared everything with him, who had laughed and played in his backyard, was now someone else entirely. But despite all these changes, something still felt familiar. It was her voice, soft yet strong, that reminded him of the Saria he had once known. And those eyes. There was still that spark, that unmistakable warmth, even in the face of the weight of the crown she now wore. "I know this is a lot to take in, David," she said, breaking the silence that had lingered between them for some time. "But I need you to understand that I didn't ask for this. I never wanted to be a queen. I just wanted to live a quiet life, like you." David looked at her, his mind spinning. "But you are a queen now. You've been a queen for years, haven't you?" Saria nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Yes, but it's not as simple as it sounds. Becoming a queen wasn't a choice I made. It was a responsibility I was forced into. When my people found me, when they realized I wasn't from Earth, they saw me as their rightful ruler. At first, I didn't want to take on that role. I was just a girl, confused and lost. But the people needed me, David. David's heart went out to her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the burden of leadership that weighed heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just a queen. She was a symbol of hope for her people, a role that she hadn't been prepared for, and one that had taken away her childhood. I was taken from Earth when I was still so young, she continued. I didn't understand what was happening, why they chose me. But they told me that I was the heir to the throne, that I was meant to rule over them. At first I tried to escape, to run from my destiny, but I couldn't. I was their queen, whether I wanted it or not. David leaned forward, his curiosity growing. So, all these years, you've been ruling a kingdom, an entire people? Saria sighed, her gaze distant. Yes, but not all of them accept me as their queen. Some factions believe that I'm too earthbound, too influenced by the human world. They think I'm weak because I grew up among humans. And now, there's a rebellion. Some of my people want to overthrow me, claim. David opened the door, his mind still spinning from everything that had happened. Standing on the other side was a tall, intimidating man. He wore dark formal clothing, with a deep crimson cape draped over his shoulders. His eyes were cold and calculating, and his expression was one of authority. David didn't recognize him, but there was something about the man's presence that made him uneasy. The man's gaze quickly shifted past David and landed on Saria, who had stood up from her seat and moved toward the door. Her face had gone pale at the sight of the stranger, and David could see the tension in her body. Your Highness, the man said in a low voice, bowing slightly. His tone was respectful, but there was an edge to it, as though he wasn't truly pleased to be here. David looked from the man to Saria, his heart racing. What is this? Who is this person, Saria? Saria took a deep breath, her eyes not leaving the stranger. This is Commander Arik. He's one of my most trusted military leaders, or at least he used to be. He's here on official business, but I don't trust him. David stepped back, letting Arik into the room. He had no idea what was going on, but one thing was clear. This man was a part of Saria's world, a world far removed from the simple life David had known. The commander straightened, his eyes now focusing entirely on Saria. Your Highness, he began, his voice calm but firm. The rebels are becoming bolder. We've intercepted several communications indicating they are planning an attack on the capital. David's heart sank. Rebels? He asked, his voice shaky. He looked at Saria. How bad is this? What do you mean an attack? Saria's face hardened. The factions that oppose me have grown more organized. They've been calling for my overthrow for years, and now they are ready to make their move. They believe I've become too weak to rule. They want someone more ruthless. David was taken aback by her words. He had known that she had enemies, but the reality of the situation was far worse than he had imagined. A rebellion against the queen of an entire planet? He couldn't even begin to comprehend how dangerous that was. Arik's gaze shifted to David, studying him with a cold, calculating look. And who is this? He asked, his tone more hostile than before. Another human? What is he doing here, Your Highness? Saria's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained calm. David is a friend. He's here because I need his help. Arik's lip curled in slight disdain. Help? From a human? With all due respect, Your Highness, this is a matter for our people, not some outsider. David could feel the tension rise in the room. Arik clearly didn't trust him, and from the look in Saria's eyes, it was clear that she was choosing her words carefully. David understands more than you think, Commander, Saria replied, her tone now more firm. He's been my friend for years. He knows me in ways that you or anyone else here could never understand. I trust him. The commander didn't respond right away. He glanced at David again, sizing him up as though considering whether to take Saria's word for it. Finally, he spoke. Very well, Your Highness. But if this human is to assist us, he must understand what is at stake. Saria turned to David, her gaze steady. David, the attack is imminent. They are planning to take the capital city, and with it, my throne. The people who oppose me have been building an army, and they've been infiltrating key positions within my kingdom. We need to act quickly if we're going to prevent a full-scale war. David's stomach twisted. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into. He had been living an ordinary life, doing ordinary things, and now he was part of a political struggle that could decide the fate of an entire kingdom. The thought was overwhelming. I don't know what I can do, David said, his voice shaking slightly. I'm just a regular guy, Saria. I'm not a warrior. I don't know anything about leading armies or defending a kingdom. Saria stepped closer to him, her eyes softening. I know, David. And I wouldn't ask you to do any of that. But I need your help in a different way. You're here because you can think clearly, because you can see things from a perspective that none of my advisors or commanders can. You have an ability to understand the human side of things, and right now, that's more important than anything else. David took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his mind. It wasn't just about helping Saria anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, about protecting a kingdom and a people that he didn't even know. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit back and watch as everything around him fell apart. He looked back at Saria, his resolve starting to form. All right, he said, his voice more determined than before. I'll help, but I need to understand more. What exactly are we up against? How do we stop this rebellion before it's too late? Saria nodded, her expression serious. The rebels have been using guerrilla tactics to slowly weaken my forces. They have spies everywhere, and they know how to stay hidden. But we can't let them win. If they take the capital, it's over. The throne will be lost and my people will be thrown into chaos. David turned to Arik, who had been standing silently, his arms crossed. What's your plan then? How do we stop them? Arik's gaze shifted to Saria before he spoke. We've been preparing a counter-offensive, but it's not enough. The capital's defenses are strong, but not impenetrable. We need to strike first. We need to take the fight to them before they can execute their plan. Saria looked at David, her expression filled with uncertainty. David, I need you to help me navigate through this. I need you to help me get inside the minds of my people. They don't trust me because I've been too focused on Earth. They see me as an outsider. You've always been able to see things clearly, without the influence of power. You can help me gain their trust. David nodded slowly. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew what he had to do. He didn't have any military experience, but he understood people. And right now, that was the most important thing. We'll do this together, David said, his voice steady. We'll figure out a way to stop them. I'll help you. Saria's eyes softened, and for a moment, David saw the girl he had once known, the one who had been his best friend, the one who had shared his life. She wasn't just a queen to him anymore. She was still Saria, the woman who had trusted him all those years ago. Thank you, David, Saria whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would do without you. But as she spoke, a shadow passed over her face. She turned toward the window, staring out into the distance, as though sensing something dangerous in the air. The attack was coming. Time was running out, and David knew that whatever happened next, their lives would never be the same. The night was still, the only sound being the occasional rustle of the wind outside. David sat with Saria, Commander Arik, and a few of her trusted advisors around a large table. The maps and holographic displays of the capital city flickered before them, showing detailed layouts of the defenses and the city's strategic points. It felt like David was in over his head, surrounded by men and women who spoke in military terms he didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear. The situation was dire, and they didn't have much time. I've sent out scouts to gather information on the rebel positions, Arik said, pointing to several points on the map where enemy movements had been detected. They're spread thin, but they're dangerous. We've underestimated them before. Saria leaned forward, her face tense. Underestimating them will cost us. We can't afford another mistake. David glanced between them, still trying to get his bearings. So what do we do? How do we stop them before they attack? Arik's cold gaze fell on him for a moment. Then he turned back to the map. We need to cut off their supply lines and take out their communication network. If we can do that, we can stop them from coordinating their attack. But it won't be easy. David nodded, trying to follow the conversation. He had no military experience, but he could see the seriousness in Saria's eyes. This wasn't just about the rebellion. This was about her people, her kingdom, and her future. And now, it was about him too. David, I need you to help me navigate through the politics of this, Saria said, her voice soft but firm. Arik and his commanders understand the military side, but I need someone who can think like a human. I need someone who understands the emotions of my people, not just the tactics. David swallowed. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy cloak. I'll do what I can, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. But how am I supposed to get through to them? How can I make them trust you again? Saria's expression softened. You already know the answer, David. You've always been able to connect with people in a way that I never could. That's why I need you now. David looked at her, searching her face for something that could help him understand what she was asking. All right, he said finally. I'll try. But we need to move fast. If we wait too long, they'll have the upper hand. Just as he spoke, a guard entered the room, his face grim. Your Highness, he said, bowing low. The enemy has been spotted near the southern border. They're closing in on the capital. David felt his heart race. The attack had begun. Saria stood up immediately, her face hardening into the calm, authoritative expression of a queen. Prepare the forces, she ordered. We move out in 1 hour. David rose with her, feeling the weight of the situation settling in. He had come here to help, but now it was real. The fate of an entire kingdom rested on the choices they made in the coming hours. And the clash of swords and the roar of explosions echoed through the battlefield as David stood beside Saria, his heart pounding in his chest. The rebellion had arrived, and it was far worse than he had imagined. The rebels, an organized force of soldiers and spies, had ambushed Saria's army on the outskirts of the capital. It was chaos, pure and simple. David had no training in combat. He was no soldier, no warrior. He had never expected to find himself here, in the middle of a war. But Saria needed him, and so he stood by her side, doing his best to keep his head together while the world around him seemed to fall apart. Saria, however, was different. Her eyes were sharp, focused, as she moved through the battlefield, issuing commands and encouraging her troops with the confidence of a seasoned leader. She was no longer just the girl from Earth that David had known. She was a queen, and it was clear now more than ever that she had grown into that role. Despite the chaos, David couldn't help but watch her with awe. She was strong, resolute, yet her face was drawn with the weight of her responsibility. Her people depended on her, and the fate of her kingdom rested in her hands. The battle raged on around them, the ground trembling beneath their feet with every explosion. David moved quickly to Saria's side as she barked orders at her commanders. We can't afford to retreat now, Saria said, her voice carrying over the noise of the battlefield. We hold the line here or the capital falls. We can't let that happen. David nodded, his throat dry. But how are we going to do that? They have more men, more firepower. We don't have the resources. We fight with what we have, she said, her eyes fierce. We fight for the future of my people. David looked at her, his heart racing. This wasn't just about a kingdom anymore. This wasn't just about Saria's throne. This was about the lives of her people, about everything she had built, everything she had fought for. And now, it was all on the line. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his thoughts. Arik, the commander, appeared at his side, his face grim. We need to push them back, Arik said, his voice low and urgent. We can't let them advance any further. We'll be overrun if we don't act now. David felt a surge of panic. He was no warrior, and he didn't know what he could do. But he knew he couldn't just stand there and watch. Not when Saria, Needed him. I'll do whatever I can, David said, his voice steadier than he felt. Arik gave him a sharp look. Then stay close. Keep your head down. As the battle intensified, David found himself pulled into the thick of the fight. He wasn't holding a sword or wielding a weapon, but he was there, moving through the chaos, doing whatever he could to help. He carried messages between commanders, helped the injured, and did his best to keep his mind clear. He couldn't afford to be afraid. Not now. Not when Saria was counting on him. Hours passed, but it felt like days. The rebels were relentless, pressing on, but Saria's forces held strong. There were moments of success, fierce pushes back against the enemy, strategic retreats that kept the capital's defenses intact, but the battle was far from over. By the time the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the battlefield, the rebels had retreated, only slightly, but enough for Saria's forces to regroup. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning debris. The wounded were everywhere, and David's stomach churned at the sight of the destruction. He had never seen anything like this before, never imagined that one day he would be in the middle of a war. Saria stood at the edge of the battlefield, her expression unreadable as she watched her troops regroup. David moved toward her, his legs heavy from exhaustion. He didn't know if he had the strength to keep going, but he knew he had to. For her people. Saria, he said, his voice quiet. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with the same exhaustion he felt. We've won a small victory today, David, but it's not over. The rebels will be back. We have to be ready. David looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of what she was asking. But how? They'll just keep coming, won't they? How do we stop them? Saria's gaze softened, and for a moment, she seemed like the girl he had once known. Don't know, she admitted. I wish I had all the answers, David. But what I do know is that we can't give up. We've come this far. We have to keep fighting. David took a deep breath, the reality of the situation sinking in. This was no longer just about helping his childhood friend. This was about standing by her side through everything. Through war, through uncertainty, through the hard choices that lay ahead. And then, in that moment, the weight of what she had asked him hit him full force. She wasn't asking just for his help in battle. She was asking him to help her lead, to help her find a way forward in a world that had become too dangerous, too unpredictable. David's mind raced. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. He was just a regular man caught up in a war he never asked for. And yet, here he was, standing next to the woman who had been his friend and was now the ruler of an entire people. She had trusted him, had believed in him, and now she was looking to him for guidance. The thought terrified him. What if he failed her? What if his decisions led to more suffering, more loss? He wasn't equipped to make these kinds of choices. He didn't have the strength or the wisdom to lead a kingdom. But then he looked at Saria again. She wasn't asking him to lead her kingdom. She was asking him to help her find a way through the darkness, to be her partner, to stand beside her in the face of the unknown. And that was something he could do. I won't let you down, Saria, David said, his voice stronger than before. I'll help you, whatever it takes. She smiled faintly, a look of gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, David. I don't know what I'd do without you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in shadow, David realized that this wasn't just about a rebellion. It wasn't just about war or politics or power. It was about the bond between him and Saria, the trust they shared, and the choice he had made to stand by her side no matter what. The rebellion wasn't over, but as long as they had each other, David knew they had a chance to survive it. The days after the first major battle were filled with planning and preparation. The rebellion had been pushed back, but not enough. Saria's kingdom was still on the brink of collapse. The rebels had retreated to regroup, but it was only a matter of time before they would strike again, stronger and more determined than before. David had spent most of his time alongside Saria, helping her in any way he could. He wasn't a strategist, and he wasn't a soldier, but he had become her confidant, her sounding board. She needed him not for his military skills, but for something deeper. She needed him to remind her of who she was, before the crown, before the war. She needed someone who could help her see through the politics and the battles to the heart of what mattered most, her people, and the future she hoped to build for them. They spent long nights together, talking, planning, and finding ways to strengthen the fragile alliances that were keeping the kingdom from falling apart. David had learned more about leadership in those few days than he ever thought possible. But the truth was, he wasn't ready. No one was. The morning of the final battle arrived far too soon. David stood with Saria in the war room looking over the maps of the capital. The city was preparing for what could be the last stand in this war. The enemy forces were larger than ever, and this time, they weren't going to back down. "I don't know if I can do this, David," Saria said, her voice quiet but filled with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "What if we fail? What if all of this was for nothing?" David looked at her, his heart heavy with understanding. She had been carrying the weight of an entire kingdom on her shoulders for so long. And now, standing at the brink of everything, she was questioning whether she could still lead them to victory. "We don't know what's going to happen," David said, his voice steady but gentle. "But you've already done so much. You've brought your people together, you've kept them safe, and now you're fighting for their future." Saria met his eyes, her gaze searching for something in his words. "But what if it's not enough? What if my people don't trust me anymore?" David shook his head. "You're not just their queen. You're their symbol. You've shown them what it means to fight, to stand up for what's right. They'll follow you because they believe in you." Saria's expression softened, and for a moment, David could see the girl she had once been. The girl he had known. The girl who had laughed and played with him. The girl who had trusted him with her secrets and dreams. "You've always believed in me, haven't you, David?" Saria asked, her voice tinged with a sadness that had always been there, hiding beneath the strength she tried so hard to show. David nodded. "I never stopped believing in you. Even when you were far away, even when you became queen. You were always the same person I knew as a child." Saria smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. She was holding back tears, and David could see the struggle in her eyes. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she whispered. "I don't know if I can keep being strong." David stepped closer, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone. You've never been alone. You've always had people by your side." For the first time in a long time, Saria let her guard down. She leaned into David's touch, her shoulders shaking as the weight of her responsibility finally caught up with her. David stood with her, offering her the comfort he knew she